You are listening to the Overfunctioning Podcast Chat Sessions, connecting leadership concepts and local leaders. Welcome, friends. I'm Alex McMahon, and I'm here today with Noelle Beck.
Hi.
Noelle is director and founder of First Glance, which works with urban and at-risk teens, and she's been doing that for 17 years. She was a 2015 class member of Leadership Akron. She founded Akron on purpose, and also was leading a conference of Akron Women on Purpose, which is just recently, and talked a lot about women leadership. And last but not least, she is the wife of Tim for 17 years. And so Noelle is one of my favorite people and has a big impact in Akron, especially Kenmore. And yeah, her leadership has really brought a lot of people together. And so I thought she'd be great to have on our podcast. And so the broadest question ever, obviously, we're going to give you here is, what is leadership? And then we're just going to run with that. So Noelle, to you, what is leadership?
To me, I've been talking about this phrase for a while now when I talk about leadership. And so I don't know if it's my definition of leadership, but I think it shows how to demonstrate good leadership. And that is, years ago, a good friend of mine, Carol Ulmer, said to me, if you really love somebody, you genuinely want what's best for them. And I have been applying that really across the board. I think that's kind of how I've led for the last 17 years, but I don't know that I would have put those words on it. But when I think about leadership, and I've watched good leaders, and I watch even people who are led by good leaders, genuinely, if you genuinely want what's best for the people that you work alongside, if you genuinely want what's best for the organization, you'll see everybody thrive. And so I've watched that time and time again. As people who are working for an organization, it's the same thing. If they genuinely are wanting to see the people around them thrive, if they're genuinely wanting to see the organization thrive, you'll see a lot of growth rather than that desire. And it's all in us. It's in me of like, this is mine. I need to hold on to my pride or hold on to my, my recognition for whatever I've done. But if you continue to give it away, if you continue to really care about the people, literally everybody grows, and it has the largest impact.
Yeah, so how have you gotten there? So I imagine there's a process that goes through that. You just don't wake up or born like, hey, I'm just doing everybody else. How do you get there as a person? What would you suggest?
A lot of it's watching people who make good leadership decisions. I say it often. I worked under a guy, Dave Smith, who worked at the chapel in Akron. I was in college, and I worked under him. He is still, to this day, one of the best leaders I've known. But I didn't know that he was, right? And so then, as I left from under him, and I would interact with other people, or even when I was still under him, but interact with other people, and they would send criticism in a group email, or they would, make kind of like, ask everybody their opinion and then make an executive decision of their own that was which was really literally against 100% of the vote, right? Like, you watch these things, and I remember going to a friend of mine, Karen Freeman, who helped me start First Glance, and I would say, Karen, why is somebody doing this? This is ridiculous. And she says, it's not Dave Smith. And I recognized that he really had good leadership qualities. And so I think the way to get there is to look for leaders who are good at what they do. And the other thing that Dave taught me was you can learn something from everyone. So he really broke down that hierarchy very early on. I've broken down that hierarchy at First Glance. I don't let anybody call me boss. We don't look at it as a tier on the top. Technically, am I? Yes. Technically, could I fire people or tell them what to do? Yes. But I function as a team. And so when my fundraising director comes into my office and says, this is what I need, Noelle, I say, yes. You're the expert of that field. Even as I hire people, you're the expert in your department. So as much as I'm the boss, I submit to whatever they need, right? And so that goes back to wanting to see them thrive, wanting to see the organization thrive, and realizing I can learn something from every person I come into contact with. So How do they interact with students? How do they interact with each other? What are they better at than me?
Yeah.
Then let's go learn from them. Just because you're 18 and I'm 38, it doesn't mean I can't learn from you.
Yeah. I remember this whole process of talking about allowing other people to have an influence within your group or your system, which is what you're talking about. Allowing people to do what they're best at. And I remember a while ago talking to you about First Glance and about how you guys, I think you have a year-end review or something like that, where you go through every piece of First Glance and you break down and figure out whether it's something you want to do over again. And as far as, and you've talked a little bit about allowing people to do what they want to do, and so it made me curious to think about, like, what do you do, Noelle? So, like, you let all these other people do all these other things, but leading this organization, which has been awesome, like, where have you found, where your leadership, like, what do you do, I guess? I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
Maybe on the vision side or mission side, is that where you kind of see yourself sometimes, or is it pulling people together, or...
Sure. Yeah, so there's a couple parts. One is I am still kind of the broad vision of First Glance. So we try and get everybody so if you've ever heard me talk about First Glance, I talk about our mission. We exist to connect students to Christ and the church through real, loving, non-threatening avenues. Yeah. And I say that all the time so that everybody can either say, I'm on that train, or I'm not on that train. Mm-hmm. And that's okay, but just everybody will hear me say that.
Yeah, there's you talk about train, don't mean to interrupt you, but like, there's a saying that my buddy and I talk about, and we say, like, if you don't have those people on the train, so you're driving this train, and that's your mission on the train, and you have people that are on the train that aren't part of that mission, it's like an awful train ride.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure you've had those interactions all the time before.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry.
Yeah. So we do that. So one is I do continue to cast vision. My heart really is for teenagers, for the hurt, for those who don't know Christ. I mean, I have kind of a passion, and people have come alongside. So we do a vision day that you talked about every year. Everything's against the chopping block. We don't want to end up where we didn't mean to be. So we serve 250 meals a week. That's great, and we have family-style meals. If I become a soup kitchen in 10 years, I would be frustrated at that. Is being a soup kitchen bad? No.
Yeah.
But could you go that direction? So that's part of it. The other part that I tell everybody, this is my role as the director of First Glance, my role is to empower people to do ministry well. Mm-hmm. So I oversee anybody who runs a program, and I basically just allow myself to come alongside, to encourage, to make sure that they have the resources they need. We see almost 1,000 teenagers in a year. I, Noelle Beck, can't hang out, love, care for, show up to whatever event they need me to 1,000 teenagers. Yeah. So we have 90 volunteers. Well, we have to keep those volunteers always understanding what the vision is and empowered to do what they need to do ministry well. Yeah. So if somebody walks in my door and says, hey, Noelle, I need $2,000 for this event, I'm going to work hard to find them $2,000 for that event.
So how do you keep them all connected with that mission?
One is I tell anybody who runs a program, obviously I meet with them monthly and individually as needed. But I tell them there's 2 rules. They need to allow every volunteer to feel part of something bigger. So even if they're behind the snack bar and they have, a night that they don't feel like anything happened, for another volunteer to say, like, hey, this kid came to Christ, or this kid, confessed some terrible thing that happened in their lives, and we're going to step in and help them. Yeah. They feel part of something bigger, even if they themselves didn't do it. Yeah. And the second is to feel thanked. And so we work hard to thank all of our volunteers on a regular basis. Every year we do a big dinner, a thank you dinner. And with it, we write individual notes, right? I hate lame notes. Anytime I, go to a wedding, I want to give them money, and then I want to write in the card, please don't write me a thank you note. Because every thank you note is, thanks for the money. It's going to help us do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
Like build our home together.
Yeah.
And really, we make every thank you note. Hey, thanks for investing in Austin. He looks at you as his dad. You know, like those are the words that need to happen. And so a lot of my making sure that we're staying on task is one, communicating always with those who oversee the programs. Then having them communicate with those who are volunteers, making sure they feel valued and part of something bigger.
Yeah.
And then a couple times a year, we have a big all-volunteer meeting so that everybody in the room can see each other. We have 11 programs. So they don't know who's volunteering with who. Sometimes I walk in the door and they don't know who I am, which is actually my favorite. So they need just kind of, how do we continue to communicate everything to them?
Yeah. And so have you found, when you start out early on, and I imagine, has this always been the same way that you've wanted to run? you know, I know that things have changed over 17 years,
Sure.
But as far as the mission goes and the example that you had, how to lead an organization, things have evolved and changed over time, hopefully, I imagine.
Yeah.
But as far as I'm thinking, there's had to have been some pitfalls in the past where you haven't, you know, have had some people in the wrong places, and like, could you kind of explain how that has worked and how you've grown as a leader through that?
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't have to be super specific examples, but
yeah. No, I mean, that's part of it is one, you want to give people the freedom to fail. So one is you kind of allow people to learn as they go. And this was a hard thing for me to learn. The hardest thing for me to learn, and I remember, I mean, just having, and again, Dave taught me this. We had these guys who were in high school. They were not great musicians, and they were leading our worship, right, in the junior high department. And it was not good. I'm sorry. You know who you are. And I remember going to David's office, why are we doing this? And he said, Noelle, we have to let them learn. And the only way we're going to learn is if we let them try. And it's not detrimental.
No.
You know, it's not detrimental. So I said, okay, so they learn and grow. And now, I mean, one of the guys has a job at a church for the I mean, he's like still doing it, right? And so I think to allow some failure, but to also continue to have conversation. And so that's probably the biggest piece that I've learned is I should never come into a yearly review or an interaction that anybody's super surprised with something that's gone on for a long time.
Yeah.
So address the conversation right away. Always a lot of words of life. Hey, you're doing 10,000 things good. This you screwed up, right? And to be able to say that. We've had to have people step down for one reason or another, and almost, I mean, I would say 90% of them came back as volunteers, even though we've kind of said we have to part ways. And really, it wasn't personal. You don't have to make it personal. This is your job description, or this is your expectation. You're unable to meet that expectation. We've given you a period of time to try and meet that expectation. It's not a good fit for you. It's not a good fit for us. And I think that that's where we get scared to say that. And the reality is, and that's where it goes back to my initial statement, if you genuinely want what's best for the other person, you'll see them thrive. And guess what? If I have you in the wrong role and you're hating your life, it's not good for you or me.
Yeah.
And so how do you have some of those conversations delicately? And I didn't have them delicate in the beginning. I mean, those are the things that you learn. Or you don't like conflict. I didn't like conflict. If you're in a home with no conflict, right? Don't talk about it. And so I didn't want to talk about it, right? I didn't because I didn't even know how to engage conflict very well. Nobody wants to engage it. But really, if you lean into those conversations, hey, I know I did this and that hurt your feelings. I know I did this and you feel like I stepped on your toes. I apologize where I need to apologize and empower always.
So, okay, I love it. So, as far as this confrontation, if you were going to give somebody some, and I hate like, here's 5 tips for, you know, being better at whatever. I'm going to ask you that question.
What are my tips?
Yeah, what would you suggest to somebody who's having issues confronting somebody as if we've never had those issues before in our lives? So what would you say? Like, how did you get to that point to where it's been easier? You said leaning in, and how do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, you do it wrong a lot, and then you learn. Part of that is here's some of my best tips, and they're simple and they make a lot of sense, but in the moment you still break them, and that is things like don't do it in front of a group of people, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's very few times if somebody had students in danger, I would step in and I'd call them out. Outside of that, there's almost never a reason you need to do it in front of a group of people, right? Pull them aside, do it immediately. Don't say, hey, over the weekend, we had a little conflict, but we'll talk about it on Monday. That's the worst thing ever. They've got a weekend to think about it, to think they've screwed up, to feel bad, to become defensive.
Yeah.
It's going to blow up. Typically, I'll go immediately, hey, will you come into my office? Now, this freaks people out when I say come into my office.
Yeah.
But now, 90% of the time I say, hey, can you come into my office? I just have a quick question. But I would bring somebody into a private space. We're going to have this conversation. Again, I would say really positive things. Hey, these are a lot of good things. Like, this isn't defining you, but you made this mistake. Can you see this? And try and get them to understand it too. So it's not, hey, you're a moron, stop doing that. I mean, sometimes that's what you want to say, but really, you have to say, like, hey, this was a situation, this is my interpretation. Can you explain your side? Can you explain why you thought that was an appropriate decision, or why you didn't do something you were supposed to do?
Yeah, it sounds like, and maybe you clarify this, it sounds like you are factual with what you're trying to say. Even when you said, here's your job description and you're not following this, it's like, here's the facts. This is just bare bone facts, right?
Yeah.
And then if you can't follow that, this is why it's not working out. So I imagine that's part of it. And then I heard you say this a couple times of using maybe, you said don't call them a moron,
Right.
and sometimes there's a language in which you use like I statements, because I even heard you say this, like, I felt that this is the way I saw things and this is the way I've been.
Yeah.
So would you, along those lines, sounds like that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I never want to walk into any situation, and this is true even in any relationship, right? Where you walk in and you say, you did this. Now, that's how it feels sometimes, especially relationally. Like, you were selfish and you didn't think, that's not true. Something else could have prevented that. Trying to understand the situation. And yeah, for sure going through the facts of what is the actual job, and we have job descriptions for everything. We write down job descriptions for volunteers, for everything, so that people know their expectations. People don't want to fail at the expectations. Sometimes if they're not communicated ahead of time, they just sincerely don't know.
Yeah, you can't fail expectations you don't know.
Yeah. And to get away from feeling words, we only use words of life around here.
Yeah.
And that's for students and volunteers. And so I joke and you say, you want to call them more? No, we don't. Even staff members, when they joke and they want to be funny, but they call somebody a negative name because they're funny, I say, no, we're just not going to do that. We're always going to speak words of life. So even in confrontation like that, here's words of life. Here's how you're doing so many good things. Here's your identity. Your identity isn't this mistake. Your identity isn't this whatever you did, or even your inability to do this job.
Yeah.
God might not have created you to do your job this way. That's okay. Like, you just weren't created that way.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing, but how do you just speak a lot of positive and correct the actual problem and not allow somebody to walk away feeling like, I'm a terrible worker, Noelle hates me.
Yeah.
No, it's not true. But you made a mistake, and I can call you out on that. And both of those can be true.
So this way of leadership, we talk about this a lot, even we'll talk about this on our podcast too, is there's two types of anxiety, acute and chronic. And chronic is the type that just sits there. So if I tell somebody, hey, I got to talk to you on Monday, that's just chronic anxiety. It's just sitting there, and then it's just like, oh my gosh. But then when you confront somebody, you change that chronic into acute, and you're just like, okay, this is what's going on. And it might be like ripping that Band-Aid off, and like it hurts. It's uncomfortable for both sides.
Sure.
But on the other end that it's going to be a lot easier for people to understand right in that moment. Within that moment, there's a couple things that I've noticed too with this is there's an emotional world, and then there's like a rational world. Can you maybe talk about those two things when you go to confront somebody about whatever, it doesn't matter, how how do you separate yourself from being too emotional in those moments?
Sure. I mean, part of it is you have to know yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a few situations where I've had to give ample time before I interacted, right? And so sometimes you do, as much as I say, try and take care of it right away.
Mm-hmm.
If I need to give myself a few days, give yourself a few days so you aren't responding in the emotional. And again, you have to be able to pull yourself out a little. Mm-hmm. Now, and when people respond, sometimes they'll either shut down or they'll respond emotionally. Like fight or flight, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'm either going to shut down or I'm going to become really combative. Mm-hmm. And so the best thing to do is try to get it as calm as possible, articulate everything that needs to happen, and then leave the conversation, leaving it open for a follow-up conversation. Okay, if you need to talk to me, hey, this is on a Thursday. I'm not going to be around much tomorrow morning, but I'll be around tomorrow afternoon. If you have another question, sometimes I've offered that for spouses, right? You have a major conversation in reference to something that might shift their job role or even their finances. And now, they come home, they're emotional. Can you believe, right? Whatever. Yeah. Or I'm frustrated, or they're going to change my something. Yeah. And so now the spouse is all amped up. Yeah. And so to give space, okay, we brought spouses in. This is where we're at. This is why we're moving in this direction. And we want everybody to be on the same page. Typically, you try to walk people to the point where everybody can at least agree on it, even if they don't love it or even if they feel bad about it. You got to kind of get everybody to that space, but you have to bring the emotional level down. And that means you have to bring your own emotional level down. Yeah. So you have to be able to articulate it.
Yeah. And this is for another podcast, another time, but like the whole bringing yourself down emotionally is something that is like a learned art. I don't know if to call it an art, but like it takes time and it takes discipline over time to figure out how to do that. And I think you would agree to say that once you start doing that, you start to understand other people have emotions too. Like it's almost like when you're emotional, it doesn't matter what anybody else, I don't care what they think, doesn't matter, like I'm having emotions, so like they've got to just understand what I'm saying, but and to also understand in those moments when we're emotional, this person did X, Y, Z, and that can be relationally, that can be somebody you lead, your tendency is to think, something potentially negative, and a lot of times I have to go back to, was their decision malicious or intentional? 99% of the time, it's not, right? I made a mistake, I oversaw that, I thought I did it this time, I just forgot. I mean, so you have to kind of go back to their heart. Like, they're really good people, they like their job, they're trying to do a good job, whatever the case may be. They really love the teenagers, they didn't know that was in a, that we had that rule, whatever it is. It's never malicious or, harmful intentionally, and sometimes that can help you bring your own emotion down. Okay, they didn't do it on purpose. It was still a boneheaded decision, but they didn't do it on purpose. And having a relationship with that person too helps you realize and understand their background of, man, they acted really ridiculous in this situation or made this bad decision. That decision may not have been based off of that moment in time. It might have been something back at home, this happened, and all these things happened, and then exploded into whatever this was now. And I think that's something important to realize as well. And I love talking about this relationship and understanding yourself very well is super important when it comes to leadership. But you know what? We are at time, and it has been great talking to you, and be glad to have you on again maybe sometime.
Yeah.
But thanks for chatting with me, and we'll chat again.
Great.
Cool.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.